Section 22 of the Watergate Report, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Sonia Brookins, Portland, Oregon. Final Report of the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities, Volume 1, Section 22, Chapter 3, Use of the Incumbency, Responsiveness Program, Part 2. Roman numeral 3, the Responsiveness Program, the administration's basic plan to employ federal resources to effect the 1972 presidential election. A. The general plan. The responsibility for developing an overall strategy respecting the use of federal resources for re-election purposes was given by Haldeman to Malek. On March 17, 1972, Malek submitted to Haldeman a document entitled Increasing the Responsiveness of the Executive Branch. The document, which was initially drafted by William Horton and designated extremely sensitive, confidential, constituted Malek's broad view conception as to how the federal bureaucracy could be put to work for the president's re-election. His plans subsequently received Haldeman's approval. This memorandum gives a clear picture of the scope of the plan, demonstrating that the proposal was to shape diverse types of administration activities to meet re-election needs. For example, election requirements were to be taken into account in the letting of government grants, contracts, and loans, the bringing and prosecution of legal and regulatory action, the making of administration personnel decision, the determination of the issues and programs to be stressed by the administration, the communicating of administration activities to the voting public. The use of federal funds for re-election purposes received particular attention under the heading Present efforts tap only a fraction of the total potential. The document says, the Department of Commerce provides a good example to date. Gifford has made some 35 requests. Most of these involved expediting the normal grant reviewing process and securing the release of information. Approximately a dozen of these requests resulted in favorable grant decisions, which otherwise would not have been made, involving roughly $1 million. Politically, these actions have been most beneficial. Nevertheless, in spite of this achievement, the potential is much greater. In the Commerce Department, for example, there is nearly $700 million in funds remaining in this fiscal year and over $700 million in the next fiscal year, which could be redirected in some manner. The major areas of potential for fiscal year 1973 are Economic Development Administration, $275 million, Regional Action Planning Commission, $40 million, Minority Business Enterprises, $38 million, National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, $100 million, and the Maritime Administration, $230 million. Even if only 5% of this amount can be rechanneled to impact more directly on target groups or geographic areas, it would be a substantial increase over the current efforts. To capitalize upon such opportunities, the departments must initiate action themselves. This would entail each department developing a program by which it would systematically but discreetly seek out opportunities for improving services to target groups in geographic areas and then ensure that appropriate action is taken. Document continues. As originally envisioned in establishing Gifford's grantsmanship operation, direction to the departments on politically sensitive operating matters should be centralized in order to utilize this resource most effectively in serving target groups and geographic areas and to reduce the possibility of adverse publicity. But the program involved much more than the use of federal monies. Under the heading Guidelines, Malek stated, as a first step, the department should be given clear guidelines covering the political priorities, the types of operating decisions which are to be included in the program, and the procedures for planning and tracking progress. The political priorities would be spelled out in terms of key states and major voting bloc groups upon which departmental action could have an impact. Next, the types of activities covered under this program would be discussed. The major ones, of course, are positive decisions, that is, project grants, contracts, loans, subsidies, procurement, and construction projects, and negative actions, that is taking legal or regulatory action against a group or governmental body, major cutbacks in programs, and relocation of department operations. Also under this program, the departments would be expected to cultivate the leaders of organized groups which are affected by the department to gain the support of their groups for the president's re-election. Similarly, the departments would be expected to take discreet and subtle steps to gain employee support of the president's re-election. Particularly important to the present study is the clear prescription in this document that legal or regulatory action should be shaped to benefit the campaign effort. In this regard, the memorandum quoted in the previous section that referred to legal actions by the Department of Justice as a form of patronage to be utilized for campaign purposes should be recalled. The March 17 document recommended further that the departments be given certain responsibilities to implement the responsiveness plan. Each department should be required to develop a plan to ensure operating decisions reflect the priorities to the greatest extent possible. The plans would outline what amount of discretionary resources in each area identified above will be allocated to priority areas and groups along with a timetable and a responsible individual. Also included would be steps planned for strengthening control over the relevant operating decisions, the announcement process, and the public relations improvements. Finally, the plan would cover actions for cultivating organized groups and for gaining the support of departmental employees. Various White House and OMB staffers were assigned responsibilities. For example, Gifford would work with Fred Malek and his staff in establishing and supervising the departmental programs. Gifford would be the principal contact for operating matters with the departments, communicating to the departments the political priorities as well as the must operating decisions. Also, he would participate in presenting the guidelines discussed earlier to the departmental contacts, reviewing the departmental plans, and evaluating progress reports. Mr. Gifford, however, has represented to the Select Committee that he played no significant part in either the planning or the implementation of the responsiveness program. He did remark that he advised cabinet officers as a general matter to make expenditures in areas where it would be of value to the President. Mr. Horton has stated that Mr. Gifford was involved in implementing the concepts in the March 17 memorandum. The responsiveness program was to be kept secret with efforts taken to ensure that the President and the White House were not connected with it. Under the heading Possible Drawbacks, the March 17 memorandum states, "The most significant drawback of the program is, of course, the risk of adverse publicity. Naturally, steps would be taken. 1. To ensure that information about the program itself and the departmental plans would not be leaked. And 2. Keep the President and the White House disassociated with the program in the event of a leak. First, written communications would be kept to a minimum. There would be no written communications from the White House to the departments. All information about the program would be transmitted verbally. The only written material submitted by the departments to the White House would be the plans. These would be in a brief outline format, and only 2 copies would be permitted, one for the White House and one for the departmental contact. Progress reports would be verbal. Second, the documents prepared would not indicate White House involvement in any way. Also, oral and written communications concerning the program within the department would be structured to give the impression that the program was initiated by the department head without the knowledge of the White House. The memorandum concludes with the statement that the departments must be given a clear understanding that the program has the President's full backing. Malek, however, has testified that he did not know if the program did, in fact, have the President's full backing. Mr. Haldeman has stated that he does not recall discussing the specifics of the program with the President. Malek's concept of the responsiveness program is also contained in other documents that are appended to this report as exhibits. 1. A December 23, 1971, confidential memorandum from Malek to Haldeman entitled Redirecting the White House Staff to Support the President's Re-election. 2. Another confidential memorandum of the same date and similar title from Malek to Kenneth Cole of Ehrlichman's staff. 3. A confidential memorandum from Malek to Haldeman dated January 28, 1972, entitled My Role in Support of Re-election. 4. An undated confidential, eyes-only memorandum. The text indicates it was written in January or February 1972 from Malek to Haldeman, entitled Organizing for and Implementing New Responsibilities. A number of comments in Haldeman's handwriting are found on this document. Attached to this memorandum is a confidential organization chart setting forth Malek's role in the campaign, which he has confirmed as accurate in most essential particulars. 5. A confidential memorandum dated February 16, 1972, to Mitchell and Haldeman from Malek, entitled Meeting to Discuss My Role. The meeting referred to was with Ehrlichman and George Shultz. 6. An April 28, 1972 document entitled John Mitchell Briefing on Responsiveness, designated Draft Confidential. This document was prepared by Frank Herringer, another Malek staffer. 7. An undated memorandum containing Malek's handwriting entitled Administration Efforts in Support of the Re-election, prepared in May 1972 and used for briefing White House constituent group project managers and CRP voting bloc directors. These documents need not be discussed in detail, but several comments are in order. First, the memorandums indicate that the responsiveness program was viewed as a potentially significant part of the re-election effort, as the following quotations indicate. Quote, Department responsiveness. This is potentially one of the most productive activities we will undertake. End quote. Quote, potentially, one of our most significant advantages over the opposition is incumbency, if it is used properly. End quote. Haldeman, during the staff interview previously referenced, stated that he was serious about sensitizing the bureaucracy to political considerations. Second, these documents demonstrate that the goal of the responsiveness program was to politicize the executive branch. Thus, Malek, in discussing his potential campaign role, suggested that someone was needed to take the lead in the program to politicize departments and agencies, and to supervise the patronage, operation, and closely monitor the grantsmanship project to ensure maximum and unrelenting efforts. A fuller statement of this concept is contained in the December 23, 1971, confidential memorandum from Malek to Haldeman. After noting that a basic campaign objective was to politicize the bureaucracy, Malek, under the rubric politicizing the executive branch, wrote, As you have pointed out, the President's unique asset in the forthcoming campaign is his control of the executive branch. The White House must ensure that the President is able to capitalize fully upon this asset. As you know, we have already initiated programs to derive greater political benefit from grants, communications, and personnel. Also, as discussed above, we will soon be establishing firm White House control over the handling of key issues and constituent groups. These White House-directed efforts will control the key executive branch operations having the highest potential political payoff. In addition, we should take action to ensure that the day-to-day departmental operations are conducted as much as possible to support the President's re-election. Since it is impossible for the White House to directly control day-to-day activities, we must establish management procedures to ensure that the departments systematically Identify opportunities and utilize resources for maximum political benefit. To illustrate potential political activity by departments and agencies, Malik stated, for instance, GSA might undertake the following: emphasize building construction in key states, cities, and counties, expedite disposal of property for parks and schools in key states, emphasize dual fuel programs in ecology-minded areas of key states, emphasize minority procurement in those states and areas where there is a real opportunity to win some of the black vote. And he noted that politicizing the regions, which we have discussed, would be a natural byproduct of this program, since the regions would carry the major burden of implementing these politically helpful actions. Malik, however, had reservations about referring to his plan as a politicizing operation. In the same memorandum, he suggested, naturally, carrying out this program, even if done discreetly, will represent a substantial risk. Trying to pressure non-political civil servants to partisanly support the president's re-election would become quickly publicized and undoubtedly backfire. Consequently, the strategy should be to work through the top and medium-level political appointees who exercise control over most of the departmental decisions and actions. Also, to minimize any direct links to the president, there should be no directions on this project in writing, and most of the initiatives should come from the department heads themselves. In fact, as this concept is refined further, I propose we stop calling it politicizing the executive branch and instead call it something like strengthening the government's responsiveness. This last suggestion was eventually followed, and the concept became known as the Responsiveness Program. Mr. Malik has described the Responsiveness Program as more benign than these documents suggest. According to Malik, its main thrust was to ensure that the departments and agencies, taking all factors into account, serviced deserving groups and then properly communicated their good works to the voting public. His account, however, should be compared with the description of the program in public testimony of William Maruyumoto, a White House aide connected with the Responsiveness Program. Senator Talmadge: what was the Responsiveness Group? Mr. Maruyumoto: as I explained this morning, this was a group of 4 or 5 gentlemen who initially were under the leadership of Mr. Malik and later under the leadership of Dan Kingsley, who were responsible to and working with various special interest groups under Mr. Carlson's operation, as well as our personnel operation, to make sure that the various departments and agencies were responsive to requests that went to them from the White House on personnel matters, publicity, public relations, and grants and contracts. Senator Talmadge: simplified, it was a group to take maximum political advantage of public dollars that were awarded in the form of public grants and contracts, was it not? Mr. Maruyumoto: a system to facilitate some of our requests. Senator Talmadge: facilitate? What do you mean by that? Mr. Maruyumoto: try to get through the bureaucratic red tape. Senator Talmadge: in other words, my statement is correct. It was to maximize the advantage of the American taxpayers' dollars in a political effort, was it not? Mr. Maruyumoto: yes. B. The plan as conceived with particular reference to minority groups. As discussed in Section 5, there was much activity of the responsiveness ilk in connection with minority-oriented federal programs. Because of this, and because of the considerable detail in which they were set out in written form, it is useful to discuss separately the specific plans to use the incumbency that were formulated to appeal to Spanish-speaking and Black constituents. 1. Spanish-speaking plans. The basic strategy for using federal resources for campaign purposes regarding Spanish-speaking voters was outlined in a confidential document entitled The Campaign to Re-elect the President, the plan to capture the Spanish-speaking vote. prepared in early 1972 by Alex Armendariz, head of the Spanish-speaking voters division at CRP, under the heading Implementation Tools. Armendariz wrote, "Use the incumbency to the greatest extent possible to stoke this community over the next several months through appointments, grants, program development, accelerated program implementation, and publicity of the President's record through the departments and agencies. Emphasize in original." And on page 13 he noted, "The purpose of the White House Spanish-speaking constituent group task force is to mobilize the resources of the executive branch in support of the campaign effort. This task force is responsible for obtaining Spanish-speaking personnel appointments, grants, and other program initiatives." Tab G of this document, entitled Capitalizing on the Incumbency, is particularly important and is set forth in full text. Substantial assistance to the Spanish-speaking campaign can be provided through use of the control of the executive branch. Through this control, we can fill in any gaps in the President's record and generate favorable publicity for the campaign persuasion effort. In addition, a number of Spanish-speaking programs are sources of political information. Bill Marimoto is responsible for submitting a plan to capitalize on the incumbency by May 1. The elements of this plan will be directed to achieving the following end results. 1. To develop specific ideas for using grants, personnel appointments, and programs to fill out any gaps in the President's record. For example, appoint a Mexican American to a regulatory commission. 2. To set up organizational procedures and contacts with the appropriate White House staff members and the executive branch for accomplishing the above steps. 3. To provide the campaign team with up-to-date information on all programs directed at the Spanish-speaking community. 4. To use the departments and agencies' public information offices to publicize favorable administration activities in behalf of the Spanish-speaking. 5. To ensure that those federally subsidized programs which serve as havens for opposition political operatives are closely supervised so that they are devoting all their energies towards solving the problems of the Spanish-speaking poor, particularly in September and October. Mr. Marimoto has testified that he prepared and submitted the plan referred to in the above document. The Select Committee, however, has not obtained a copy of this plan, but the detailed account in Section VA of this chapter of the actual conduct that occurred regarding the Spanish-speaking community presents a comprehensive view of the type of activities encompassed by the above outline. 2. Black plans. The overall plans to use the incumbency to achieve Black support in the 1972 campaign appear in several documents. The earliest is a confidential final document dated March 15, 1972, and entitled Campaign Plan, a Strategy for the Development of the Black Vote in 1972. Significant for present purposes is a paragraph that appears at page 23 through 4 of this document under the heading Use of Administration Resources. To augment organizational efforts, it is proposed to make use of administration resources to provide visible support of deserving projects. With team members working closely to monitor economic and social programs, a selective funding approach will furnish encouragement incentives for Black individuals, firms, and organizations whose support will have a multiplier effect on Black vote support for the President. This will call for working with OMBE, SBA, Department of Labor, OEO, HUD, HEW, and the Justice Department. What we do economically will be a vital key politically. The team referenced in this paragraph is identified at page 21 of this exhibit. In order to assure maximum coordination from the outset, A team approach to implementation of strategy and execution of the plan of action will be used. The team coordinating efforts will include Robert Brown, Special Assistant to the President; Stan Scott, White House Communications Staff Member; Ed Sexton, RNC; Samuel Jackson, Assistant Secretary of HUD, representing the Council of Black Appointees; and Paul R. Jones, Black Vote Division Executive Director. It is anticipated that this group will meet regularly on a weekly basis and interact daily as needed. This memorandum concludes at page 24. In support of staff efforts, it is proposed that emphasis be placed on closer control of grants, loans, contracts, and appointments, especially from socially oriented departments and agencies. What the administration does economically is key. The major issues of concern to the rank-and-file Black voters are those which have an economic base. They are concerned about those things that affect day-to-day livelihood and well-being. Testimony taken by the Select Committee establishes that this document was probably the composite product of several contributors, among whom were Paul Jones of CRP and Robert Brown of the White House. The use of administration resources in the Black area was spelled out in greater detail in a confidential June 15, 1972, memorandum from John Clark to Malek entitled Black Vote Field Plan. At page 5 through 6 of this document, the following passage appears: Special Activities, Grants and Government Resources. At the present time, Bob Brown and his staff are handling the grants activity. To date, they have identified all Blacks who are receiving or have received money from this administration. These recipients are being utilized as a source of campaign contributions and volunteers, and as a vehicle for getting our appointees invited to various Black events as speakers and participants. They also form an excellent group of visible Blacks, and they are being used to reach the voters in their areas of influence. In addition to the above results, Bob and his staff are actively seeking out other projects that could be funded to the benefit of the campaign. They are specifically looking for projects that will impact heavily on Blacks due to voter appeal and Black involvement. To date, they have been very successful. In this area, a local Black building contractor, Jack Crawford, has developed a program for identifying potential projects, getting them funded through Bob's office, and in return obtaining a strong vote commitment for the president from the recipient. This plan is being actively pursued at present. Another specific project that is underway is the identification of all remaining grant and loan monies with a view to carefully allocating those funds to projects which will impact most heavily on Black voters. Finally, Bob and his staff are working closely with Dan Kingsley to identify various advisory boards and commissions and job openings which can be filled by visible Blacks. Even with the accomplishments so far, more work needs to be done in this area, and plans are currently being drawn to more effectively develop and coordinate this activity. The Crawford plan mentioned above is found at Exhibit Number 11. The plan at page 2 states, in order to obtain endorsements from local Black leaders who will in all probability be at least nominal Democrats, some inducements will need to be offered. The inducements could be federal financial from the normal grant-in-aid programs administered by HEW, HUD, OEO, DOL, SBA, EDA, OMBE, and USDA. The recommended locally based national representative, assisted by Black representatives of the various federal agencies, will be able to offer federal aid grant assistance to those leaders who are willing to endorse the president or at least make positive statements concerning the higher level of assistance currently being enjoyed by his institution under this administration. In addition, Crawford recommended, page 3 through 4, that There should be a White House representative who can facilitate assure the delivery of federal grant and aid funds to leaders who endorse the president and the administration's effort to improve the lot of blacks. This liaison man is charged with coordination of the federal agency personnel who are in turn charged with determining assistance needed by the institution. During his executive session, Mr. Malek testified that he did not recall receiving or seeing a copy of the Crawford Plan. However, as Exhibit Number 11 demonstrates, the plan was sent on June 26, 1972, to Malek by Robert Meriden, a CRP official who is a former Assistant Attorney General for the Internal Security Division, with the suggestion that he and Malek meet with Crawford to discuss the matter. Of the same date is a memorandum from Malek to John Mitchell entitled Black Vote Campaign Plan. Under the heading Intensify Efforts to Utilize Government Grants and Loans are the following paragraphs. I feel that our strongest selling point with black voters is the economic assistance this administration has provided to blacks. To fully capitalize on this, we have to do a better job of publicizing the grants already given and of identifying new projects for which we will receive maximum impact. The major portion of the responsibility for this activity falls on the White House side of the black team. Bob Brown and his staff have identified all blacks who are receiving or have received money from this administration. These recipients will be utilized as a source of campaign contributions and volunteers and as a group of highly visible blacks to be used to reach the voters in their areas of influence. Effective allocation of new grants requires close coordination between the White House and the campaign team. As a first step, I have asked Bob Brown to identify all major sources of grant and loan monies which could be allocated to blacks. Then, Jones and Sexton, working through their field organization, will be responsible for finding recipients in key cities who will be supportive of the re-election effort. I believe that by strengthening our field organizations and making better use of grants and loans, we can overcome the problems of the black vote division and make some inroads on black voters in November. I will keep you apprised of progress. Malek testified he was not certain that this document was actually read or approved by him or forwarded to Mitchell. However, he did not deny sending it to Mitchell. He stated that normally memorandums would not be sent to the campaign director over his name unless he had read and approved them. The committee subsequent to Mr. Malek's testimony discovered another copy of this document in Clark McGregor's CRP files that was initialed by Mr. Malek. Malek did not recall Mitchell's expressing disapprobation of the plans set forth in this memorandum. Roman numeral 4. Communication of the responsiveness concept to government and campaign officials. The significance with which the responsiveness program was perceived is evidenced by the efforts taken to inform key government and campaign officials of the workings of the program. The most important of these briefings are now discussed. 1. The various Malek documents referenced in the previous section suggest that key White House and OMB staffers such as Ehrlichman, Schultz, and Ken Cole were made aware of responsiveness concepts. Haldeman was particularly of the mind that Ehrlichman and Schultz should be informed about and approve of the responsiveness plan. In his handwritten comments on a memorandum to him from Malek, he stated, in the margin by Malek's paragraph on department responsiveness, that, quote, "Prob here is essential support of E and S, Q. Whether they fully understand and agree to this whole deal. E espe is the key to dealing with departments, and must be on board 100%, end quote. However, in an interview with the committee's staff on February 8, 1974, Mr. Ehrlichman stated he had little knowledge of the responsiveness program. Mr. Schultz, in a staff interview, likewise asserted only passing familiarity of responsiveness activities. Mr. Schultz did state that he saw one memorandum written by Malik concerning the responsiveness program, decided it was a horrible idea, and transmitted this view to Mr. Haldeman. 2. Shortly after the program was approved, key departmental and agency personnel were briefed on its precepts. In a confidential eyes-only memorandum entitled Responsiveness Program, Progress Report, attached to a June 7, 1972, memorandum from Malik to Haldeman, Malik stated, "Thus far, the program is on schedule. I have now reviewed the program with each cabinet officer, except Rogers, and with the heads of the key agencies, Action, EPA, OEO, SBA, GSA, and VA. In each session, the following was covered. Emphasized need to make re-election support the top priority and the need to respond to requests in this regard. Discussed which states, counties, and voting blocks are considered key and should be targeted by them. Had them name a top official who would be the political contact for this program, generally the undersecretary. Asked them to educate loyal appointees, including regional directors, as to priorities and expectations, thus forming a political network in each department. Asked them to review all their resources and develop a plan for maximizing impact of these resources in key areas. Indicated particular areas in their departments that require special attention. Establish my office as the channel of communications with the campaign and stress that we would work solely through Bill Gifford on grant requests. In line with this last point, 2 members of my staff, Stan Anderson and Rob Davison, have been relieved of other responsibilities to concentrate on this. They have now held follow-up meetings with the Secretary's designee in most departments to discuss the program in more detail and begin development of the department action plans. These sessions will be completed in the next few weeks. In addition, I have held follow-up meetings with the top political appointees and with the regional directors in several departments. I will hold additional meetings of this sort over the next few weeks. Mr. Malik testified before the Select Committee that in his briefings with department and agency chiefs, he employed color-coded maps that depict target groups and geographic areas where government resources should be concentrated for campaign purposes. Listings of various government officials contacted respecting the responsiveness program by Malik and his associates are found at Exhibit 12. Malik also provided Haldeman, in the June 7 memorandum, with an assessment of the success of his briefings. The response to date has been fairly good, particularly at the second echelon. The reaction of some in the cabinet, for example, Romney and Hodgson, was that they were of course already considering political ramifications and there is little more that can be done. Our approach here is to concentrate on the undersecretary and other presidential appointees, where the job gets done anyhow. Others, such as Volpe, Peterson, and Butts, have been quite receptive and should be real assets to the program. 3. John Mitchell and other key aides at CRP were briefed. The briefing memorandum prepared for the Mitchell session, Malik Exhibit Number 7, indicates that Mitchell was informed in detail of the information meetings held with the department and agency heads. Malik testified that this briefing paper probably clearly represents his discussion with Mitchell. 4. Stanton Anderson and Frank Herringer briefed the White House Constituent Group project managers and the CRP voting bloc directors on the various facets of the administration's plans to take advantage of the incumbency to the maximum degree possible. during a meeting at Camp David on May 25 and 26, 1972. Various documents appended to this report reflect the nature of that meeting and its participants. This meeting is of particular importance because it was attended by key aides in the Spanish-speaking, Black and Old Age areas where there was considerable responsiveness-type activity. The briefing paper used at this meeting has been previously referenced. It parallels other documents already discussed with several significant additions. The participants were apparently asked to be alert to opportunities to utilize the resources of the incumbency to improve our position with your constituent group. It appears that they were instructed to attempt to come up with a list of 10 or so persons from your groups that you would like to see placed in government positions for campaign purposes by the White House Personnel Office. This group was also apparently told that, in a one-shot effort, all major grants and construction decisions for the next fiscal year, 72 through 73, were reviewed prior to the finalization of the budget to ensure that, to the extent possible, they impacted only politically beneficial areas. 5. Finally, certain state chairmen for the committee to re-elect the president from first and second key priority states received a briefing on the responsiveness program. The major purpose underlying this briefing was to encourage political-oriented requests for government action from these campaign officials. End of Section 22.
Section 23 of the Watergate Report, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Final Report of the Senate Select Committee on Presidential Campaign Activities, Volume 1. 5. Results of the Responsiveness Program and other related activities. A. Activities respecting the Spanish-speaking. The portion of the Responsiveness Program presented in public testimony involved activities in the Spanish-speaking community. On November 7, 1973, William Marumoto, former staff assistant to the President, testified concerning the wide-ranging attempts on the part of certain White House and campaign officials to divert federal resources to organizations and individuals in the Spanish-speaking community to assist the re-election effort. His testimony and other evidence in the Select Committee's possession appear to demonstrate a concerted effort to reward certain administration friends and penalize its opponents. Marumoto's testimony prompted the following statement by Senator Montoya. In view of the motive that permeates the planning and blueprint of this mission, and the testimony of the witness, I feel very much obligated to comment on the incredible insult that the administration has perpetrated on the Spanish-speaking people of this country by this blatant attempt to buy the Spanish-speaking voters. They are not for sale in this country. There was a concerted effort to try to convince them that there was money in the trough if they just lined up, and the Spanish-speaking people of this country are not that kind of voter. According to the 1970 census, there were then more than 10 million Spanish-speaking citizens in this country. The plan to capitalize on the incumbency with respect to this community was an attempt to gain support, votes, and contributions regarding a constituency that had been heavily Democratic in the past. The administration concentrated its efforts in this regard on such states as Florida, Texas, and California, where the greatest number of Spanish-speaking citizens reside. The major activities discovered by this committee are now discussed. 1. Organization of Spanish-speaking effort. The leaders of the Spanish-speaking effort during the 1972 presidential campaign included officials at the White House, the Cabinet Committee on Opportunities for the Spanish-Speaking People, an independent office in the executive branch, more fully described below, and the Committee to Re-elect the President. For clarity, the major figures involved are identified. William Marumoto, former staff assistant to the president, was involved at the White House in a wide range of activities, including recruiting for federal employment, particularly from minority groups, assisting Spanish-speaking firms and organizations in obtaining federal funds, and public relations for Spanish-speaking efforts and activities. Antonio F. Rodriguez was Marumoto's assistant in the White House after September 1971. In the period from January to September 1971, Rodriguez was the chairman of the Cabinet Committee on Opportunities for Spanish-Speaking People. Henry Ramirez became chairman of the Cabinet Committee in September 1971. Carlos Conde, an assistant during 1972 to White House Communications Director Herbert Klein, was involved in the campaign's media plan to reach Spanish-speaking people. Alex Armendariz headed the CRP Spanish-speaking Voters Division. Benjamin Fernandez was the chairman of the National Hispanic Finance Committee, an arm of the Finance Committee to Re-elect the President, FCRP. According to Marumoto, the above-named individuals, with the exception of Fernandez, constituted the Spanish-speaking task force. The task force, officially known as the White House Spanish-speaking Constituent Group Task Force, was, according to Marumoto, an informal arrangement, which met every Monday afternoon during the campaign. While the exact lines of authority concerning these individuals is not certain, it is clear that all of them were heavily involved in attempts to use the incumbency to gain Spanish-speaking support. Furthermore, organizational charts prepared separately by Marumoto and Armendariz show the Cabinet Committee, the White House Spanish-speaking unit, and the Hispanic division of CRP as part of one overall campaign structure, although on Marumoto's chart he has Armendariz reporting to him, while the converse is true on the chart prepared by Armendariz. 2. Activities involving the dispensing of federal funds. There is substantial evidence that, respecting the Spanish-speaking area, political elements in the administration and campaign committee sought and achieved control over the awarding of certain government grants and contracts. When questioned concerning an OEO grant to a Spanish-speaking firm in California, Marumoto testified, Now, what was the role of Alex Armendariz from the Committee to Re-elect the President, which was the political branch of the CRP for the campaign, in meeting with Mr. Blancher of OEO and discussing your grant of $200,000? Why was he there? Marumoto: He was involved in the terms of signing off on any grants. When you say signing off, did that mean he would have to approve? Marumoto: Approve, yes. He would have to approve. Marumoto: Yes. Subsequently, Marumoto, while stating that Armendariz didn't have legal authority, of course, to sign off, testified that Armendariz had a say or input in the grant-making process. He then added, They expected him to sign off on it, and generally if he didn't sign off on it, it wasn't granted. Marumoto: Generally speaking, yes. Therefore, it would be fair to say that a very strong outside political influence was introduced into the grant-making process of the various agencies. Marumoto: Yes. Armendariz denied involvement in government grants and disclaimed the power to sign off on federal awards, stating, I never engaged in specific discussion on any particular grant or contractor of any sorts. When asked about references to his name in the reports indicating he was influencing grants, he said the references worried him and that he frequently objected to White House staffers Frank Herringer and Jerry Jones about their inclusion. Documents obtained by the Select Committee contain numerous indications that the campaign team was interjecting political considerations into the grant-making process. For example, a March 17, 1972 White House memorandum from Marumoto to Colson, entitled Weekly Report for Brown Mafia, week of March 13th through 17th, 1972, reads, Alex Armendariz, Tony Rodriguez, and I met with representatives of Harry Dent's, Clark McGregor's, and Bob Brown's offices with the grant officials of OEO to discuss ways of improving coordination and more effective means of getting political impact in the grant-making process. Discussion pointed out the tremendous need for a centralized computer capability for all departments and agencies, whereby one could obtain data regarding grants to any congressional district and/or organization. Footnote: the term Brown Mafia was discontinued following the March 24th report, after Malek wrote to Marumoto, "Please drop Brown Mafia title. It would look bad if it ever got out." End footnote. To cite another example, on March 24, 1972, Marumoto wrote an administrative confidential memorandum to Colson, copied to Malek, that stated, "Attended a meeting called by John Evans regarding minority business enterprise. Asked that Armendariz and Rodriguez also be invited. Discussed were recipients of grants for fiscal year 1972, as well as those being considered for additional grants for fiscal year 1972. In a staff interview, Evans, then a staff assistant in the Office of Domestic Counsel, described his role as a liaison with the departments and agencies, who was mostly concerned with policy rather than specifics. He did note that he received input from Marumoto and Armendariz, among others, and acknowledged that political considerations played a role in the awarding of grants. He said, for example, that if a recommendation concerning an OMBE grant was made by Marumoto, the application was favored, or an explanation given of why it was not. The message went out, do something with it. Evans stated that while he did not favor funding an unqualified group, he would rely in part on the team's recommendations and would tend to favor qualified groups who supported the administration over those who did not. Although he was approached by Armendariz, Marumoto, and Ramirez with suggestions that political contributors be funded, Evans said he never became involved with specific grants where that occurred. Another illustration of the input of political influence in the grant-making process is found in an administrative confidential White House memorandum from Marumoto to Colson and Malek, dated May 12, 1972, which reads, Rodriguez and I met, along with representatives from Bob Brown's office and 1701, Under Secretary Lynn and John Jenkins, Director of OMBE, re-funding proposals to Spanish-speaking and Black groups. This is about the third such meeting we've had to either approve or disapprove funding proposals from OMBE. We are generating some new proposals from the SS in key states. A. Specific activities to help administration friends. Numerous memoranda obtained by the committee demonstrate that the Spanish-speaking team devoted considerable effort to helping administration friends seeking federal monies. For example, in an administrative confidential report to Colson and Malek, Marumoto declared, Rodriguez met with Carlos Villarreal, administrator of UMTA, Urban Mass Transit Administration, to talk about setting aside specific monies for some of our Republican Spanish-speaking contractors. Another example of interest in aiding Spanish-speaking friends is found in an April 7, 1972 White House memorandum from Marumoto to Colson and Malek, which stated, In the grants area, Rodriguez and I are working on the following: reviewing with John Evans, Bob Brown, and Wally Henley proposals and grants at OMBE to make sure that the right people are being considered and receiving grants from OMBE. In several cases, the committee attempted to ascertain the circumstances regarding the awarding of particular grants and contracts to the president's supporters. The results of these investigations follow. 1. J. A. Reyes and Associates. The beneficiary of a number of grants was Joseph A. Reyes. Mr. Reyes was active in the president's re-election effort, particularly regarding fundraising. In fact, Reyes was chairman of the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia section of the National Hispanic Finance Committee, NHFC, which was an authorized arm of FCRP formed in 1972 to solicit campaign contributions from Spanish-speaking citizens. Reyes and his company, J.A. Reyes and Associates, were the subject of several White House weekly activity reports forwarded by Marumoto to Colson and Malek. One such administrative confidential report, dated May 5, 1972, states, "In the grants area, the following transpired. Department of Transportation, working with UMTA, re a $70,000 grant to J.A. Reyes Associates of Washington, D.C. He is the chairman of the D.C., Maryland, and Virginia section of the National Hispanic Finance Committee." Reyes, in a staff interview, stated that he had been in the consulting business for approximately 10 years, and that most of his business arose from the Section 8A program of the Small Business Administration Act. The purpose of this act is to assist in the expansion and development of small business concerns owned and controlled by eligible disadvantaged persons. During 1971, Mr. Reyes's firm grossed between $400,000 and $500,000. In 1972, his firm's business doubled to $1 million, all of which was under the 8A program. According to Reyes, he received 7 or 8 contracts and 1 grant in that year. One such contract was a $200,000 sole source non-competitive agreement with OEO, awarded in July 1972. Although acknowledging conversations with Marumoto and Rodriguez, Reyes denied knowledge of any efforts by them on his behalf regarding this contract. In a committee interview, Arnold Baker, former National Project Manager of Field Operations, Migrant Labor Division, OEO, stated that the J.A. Reyes contract with OEO was for an evaluation of and assistance to the Emergency Food and Medical Services Program, and that the contract was given without the demonstration of a need for this evaluation as required by OEO regulations. Baker said that sufficient data and expertise regarding this program had been developed through prior evaluations, and it was the unanimous opinion of officials in the unit responsible for consideration of the Reyes proposal that a study was not necessary. Over their objections, the contract was nonetheless awarded. Baker believes that the award was based solely on political motivations. He stated that the project division had decided not to fund Reyes's proposal, but when Peter Mireles, director of the Migrant Division OEO, received word of this decision, he reversed it. According to Baker, sometime after the contract was awarded, it was canceled due to substandard work. However, Baker reported that it was reinstated by James Griffith, director of the Migrant and Indian Division of the OEO. Baker stated that this contract was rammed down the throat of the department officials, including himself. The Select Committee also interviewed Dan Cox, a manpower specialist with the Migrant Division, Department of Labor, who formerly was the contract application specialist with the Migrant Division of OEO, responsible for evaluating the Reyes contract. Cox agreed with Baker that the contract to evaluate the Emergency Food and Medical Services Program was not warranted. It was also Cox's belief that J.A. Reyes Associates was not qualified to make that evaluation. In addition, Cox stated that he was told by Peter Mireles that the contract was a political payoff. Mireles, in an interview, defended the need for the Reyes contract. Mireles acknowledged that some of his subordinates had questioned the qualifications of J.A. Reyes Associates, as well as to the efficacy of the proposal, but Mireles insisted that his decision was not the result of political influence. Mireles denied telling Cox that the contract was a political payoff. In another interview, James Griffith, now acting OEO Deputy Assistant Director for Operations, denied any political influence in grant or contract processes at OEO. He did recall, however, certain rumors as to the lack of necessity for the J. A. Reyes contract, but could not remember specifics. Griffith also related that a telegram was sent from the Office of Program Review to Reyes canceling the contract. Griffith felt this action was not programmatically justified, and he thus became involved in reinstating the contract. 2. Ultra Systems Incorporated. Another effort to aid an administration supporter is revealed in an Administrative Confidential White House Weekly Activity Report dated May 19, 1972, from Maramoto to Colson and Malek. Rodriguez is assisting Ultra Systems Incorporated of Long Beach, California, with a $200,000 grant from OMBE. This organization strongly supports the administration. As in the case of J. A. Reyes and Associates, Ultra Systems Incorporated had strong ties with the National Hispanic Finance Committee. Fernando Huachaca, vice president of Ultra Systems, was the NHFC national treasurer. The proposed OMBE grant to Ultra Systems Incorporated was also the subject of a White House memorandum dated August 8, 1972, from former White House staffer Nathan Bayer to Armendariz and Rodriguez. I spoke with John Jenkins this afternoon concerning the current status of your priority OMBE proposals. In the case of Amex Civil Systems and Ultra Systems, John expects to have requests for information in their hands by the 1st of next week. I strongly advise you to encourage them to complete the RFIs as quickly as possible and return them to Jenkins. He assures me that even in the absence of their completion, he will have the investigation and security clearance begun and the audit begun. In a staff interview, Huachaca denied that there was any quid pro quo involved in the above grant, which was awarded in October 1972. Huachaca stated that he had applied to OMBE for federal funding in early spring of 1972. When nothing materialized, he asked Rodriguez, a longtime friend, if Rodriguez knew anyone at OMBE to whom Rodriguez could make an inquiry on his behalf. B. Action against persons not supportive of the administration. There is evidence that qualified firms that failed to share the administration's political goals and declined to participate in the president's re-election effort were penalized in their efforts to secure government funding. References to unfriendly or pro-democratic companies and individuals appeared with some frequency in Maramoto's weekly reports and in other White House CRP documents. Thus, a June 23, 1972, Administrative Confidential Weekly Report from Maramoto to Colson and Malek reads, Rodriguez working with Nate Bayer of the Domestic Affairs Council, re-identifying SS groups who have applied for federal grants at the Department of Labor who are unfriendly toward the administration. Bayer and Armendariz have both denied to the Select Committee that cutting off contractors and grantees not supportive of the administration was administration policy. But there is evidence that attempts to excise unfriendly recipients of federal funds actually were made. Moreover, both Maramoto and Rodriguez have admitted that they felt persons opposing the administration should not receive government grants. 1. Development Associates. Leveo Sanchez. One of the most instructive cases involved Leveo Sanchez, the head of Development Associates Incorporated, a Washington-based consulting firm. An Administrative Confidential Memorandum dated July 29, 1972, from Maramoto to Rob Davison of the White House staff, notes that Sanchez's firm had been funded for $1 to $2 million by our administration. After referring to Sanchez's association with Sergeant Shriver and Frank Mankiewicz, the memorandum records that Sanchez's company had recently received over $900,000 in government contracts and was under consideration at the Department of Labor and HUD for additional contracts totaling $100,000. The memorandum continues, "This is a classic example of a firm not necessarily on our team, which is making a comfortable living off of us. These are grants that we're aware of, which indicates they may have a few others. I would recommend, if it's not too late, we stop the proposals at Department of Labor and HUD." Copies of this memorandum went to Armendariz and Rodriguez. 5 days later, on July 24, 1972, Armendariz wrote a confidential memorandum to Davison with copies to Marumoto and Rodriguez, which stated, "We have inquired about Development Associates and have learned of their close ties with the Democratic National Committee and Cesar Chavez. We fully concur with Bill Marumoto's memo of July 19th. The background of these memorandums is informative. According to Sanchez, in the spring of 1972, he was solicited for a campaign contribution by Joseph Reyes, chairman of the Washington, Maryland, and Virginia chapter of the National Hispanic Finance Committee. As discussed above, Reyes was the beneficiary of certain grants and contracts as to which Marumoto intervened. Reyes, Sanchez says, told him he was expected to make a $1,000 contribution to the president's re-election effort. Sanchez declined. On July 17, 1972, at the invitation of Marumoto, Sanchez attended a White House luncheon with Marumoto and David Weir, now Deputy Special Assistant to the President and formerly the Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Administration and Management. Sanchez related that during this lunch, Marumoto told him that they had been very good to his firm and that he was about to be awarded a $400,000 contract from the Department of Labor. Sanchez said Marumoto then stated that Sanchez and Development Associates would be expected to show their appreciation in a substantial manner in regard to the president's re-election effort. Sanchez stated he informed Marumoto and Weir he knew he would not receive a $400,000 labor contract and that Development Associates had previously received contracts because of its proficiency. Sanchez said he rejected the request to support the re-election effort and that Marumoto and Weir then implied possible adverse consequences. When questioned concerning his meeting with Sanchez, Marumoto testified. Can you, to the best of your recollection, tell the committee what it was that you discussed with Mr. Sanchez at that meeting? Marumoto: If I recall, the other party that was involved in that meeting at that time was David Weir, who was Under Secretary Silberman's aide in the Department of Labor, who had the responsibility on the other side, on the department side, on this responsiveness program. He and I had lunch in the White House staff dining room and discussed generally a number of things pertaining to Mr. Sanchez's operation. Who initiated that meeting? Marumoto: I believe I did, sir. I ask you very specifically whether or not you were making this recommendation, as you show in your memorandum, because you felt that this was a contractor who was living off of us and was not supporting the administration, and you were recommending he be cut off for that reason. Your testimony, as I recall it, was that that was the reason that you wrote the memorandum. Marumoto: That is correct. Marumoto denied that there was any discussion during the luncheon concerning contributions, and he did not recall any exchange regarding the labor contract. He stated he was not aware of any effort to solicit contributions from Sanchez at any time. But his testimony continued. That was shortly after, just 2 days after that meeting, that you wrote this memorandum. Marumoto: Right. Is there any relationship between this memorandum, written 2 days after that meeting, and the meeting? Marumoto: I am sure there must have been. If you are sure there must have been, can you recall what that relationship may have been or must have been? Marumoto: I guess it was our impression, but our decision, that it appeared, from sources outside of our meeting, that he was not going to support the administration, so this was a recommendation that we made. David Weir, in a staff interview, stated that no discussions of campaign contributions, re-election support, or government grants or contracts took place during this luncheon. Weir further declared that he was not expecting Sanchez's presence and does not know why he was there. According to Weir, he has never acted to influence a decision on grants, contracts, or loans for Sanchez or his firm. Sanchez, however, did experience adverse administration action. On September 25, 1972, Sanchez's company was graduated from the SBA 8A program. This graduation, which the SBA was pleased to effect, and for which the Development Associates was congratulated, actually meant that Development Associates could no longer qualify for preferred status under the provisions of Section 8A, and had to compete generally with other non-disadvantaged contractors. Not only does graduation from the 8A program adversely affect future grants, but a graduated company loses all previously awarded grants at the close of the fiscal year in which its eligibility ceases. In other words, graduation from the program can have a devastating impact. Marimoto acknowledged that there was a political input on the Sanchez decision. He could not recall any other Spanish-speaking graduates from the 8A program. Subsequent to Development Associates graduation, efforts to reinstate the company in the 8A program were made by Dan Trevino, its vice president, who also served on the Texas Spanish-speaking committee to re-elect the president. Trevino contacted Carlos Conde, a friend, to arrange for Trevino to meet with Henry Ramirez on this matter. Trevino met with Ramirez in Washington shortly after the election. At this meeting, according to Trevino, Ramirez stated that Development Associates had been generally uncooperative in the re-election effort. Ramirez, Trevino said, gave as examples of an uncooperative attitude Sanchez's refusal to provide campaign printing at Development Associates' expense, and his failure to make a campaign contribution. Ramirez told Trevino that Development Associates lost its 8A certification because of this attitude. When Trevino pointed out that he had been active in the president's re-election effort, Ramirez suggested that Trevino would have no difficulty obtaining Section 8A contracts if he divorced himself from Sanchez. Ramirez then suggested that Trevino see Rodriguez. The meeting between Rodriguez and Trevino, as described by Trevino, was quite similar to his meeting with Ramirez. Sanchez was pictured as uncooperative during the campaign and close to Shriver and Mankiewicz. Rodriguez indicated that the decision to remove Development Associates from the 8A program was not directed against Trevino, and that he would try to help Trevino in some manner. Trevino then turned to Peter Michaelides, director of the Migrant Division of OEO, with whom Development Associates had a contract to service migrant workers. Michaelides told Trevino that OEO was satisfied with Development Associates' work on this contract, but that he was getting pressure from the White House to discontinue it. Following this conversation, Trevino returned to Texas to await word concerning the result of his efforts. In January 1973, not having heard from Rodriguez, Trevino had Conde arrange another appointment with him, this one attended by Sanchez as well as Trevino. There, Rodriguez informed Trevino and Sanchez that an OEO migrant contract in which they were interested was slated to go to Amex, a West Coast firm, but that Rodriguez would try to assist in Development Associates' reinstatement as an SBA 8A contractor, despite Sanchez's lack of cooperation. The following month, the problem was still not resolved. According to Trevino, he again contacted Conde to arrange a meeting with Marimoto. At this meeting, Trevino said, he began to summarize the problems facing Development Associates, but Marimoto cut him short, indicating that he, Marimoto, was well aware of the situation. Trevino said that Marimoto stated that recertification was being worked on and that Rodriguez would be in contact with Trevino. Sanchez, however, has advised the Select Committee staff that Development Associates was never reinstated in the 8A program. Armendariz, testifying in executive session, denied any involvement in penalizing Sanchez. It will be recalled that Armendariz had written Davison that we fully concur with Marumoto's memorandum to Davison of July 19th, which recommended that Sanchez's proposals at Department of Labor and HUD be stopped. When questioned concerning his memorandum, Armendariz stated that when he said we fully concur with Marumoto's memorandum, he meant he concurred only with the description of Sanchez as having close ties with Democratic leaders and the Democratic Party. Armendariz, who received all of Marumoto's White House memoranda, testified that taking action against companies unfriendly to the administration is just completely contrary to my ethics in politics. 2. Activities respecting other non-supportive companies. Another instance where a non-supportive group received White House attention is illustrated by a May 26, 1972 Administrative Confidential White House memorandum from Marumoto to Colson and Malek. Expressed concern to OEO re a $3 million grant to the Mexican-American Unity Council, only to find there are some legal hang-ups to try to cut them off. They promised to at least monitor the group. Marumoto testified in public session as follows. Dash. What was the opposition to the Mexican-American Unity Council? Marumoto. I think this was a situation where they had received a grant from OEO before someone realized that they had a group that weren't necessarily supportive of the administration, and there was some inquiry of trying to unfund them. Upon checking with their general counsel, we found that it could not be done. Dash. Was there any question as to their qualification? Marumoto. I don't recall, sir. Dash. So the effort to unfund them really was based on your learning that they were non-supportive? Marumoto. Yes, sir. Still another example of the administration's attitude toward unfriendly companies is found in a confidential White House memorandum dated March 2, 1972, from Marumoto to James Lynn, then Undersecretary of Commerce, now Secretary of HUD. In line with our recent discussion regarding NEDA, National Economic Development Agency, and our comments of the tail wagging the dog, I am attaching an editorial written by a NEDA employee opposing the appointment of Chip Guerra as Deputy Director of OMBE. This is the latest example of the unwillingness to cooperate in a spirit of cooperation with the administration. I think before Commerce signs off on their $2 million grant, you should sit down with Frank Viega and explain the facts of life. I would appreciate being kept abreast of this highly important matter. NEDA was founded by Benjamin Fernandez around 1969 with the purpose of assisting Spanish-speaking businessmen. Frank Viega, former president of NEDA, in a staff interview, stated that he did in fact meet with James Lynn in 1972, and that Lynn informed him that the White House would like NEDA to help the president. Lynn allegedly indicated that the White House knew who their friends were. Also present at this meeting was Alfred R. Villalobos, former NEDA Executive Vice President and Chief Executive Officer, who in a staff interview indicated that Lynn had stressed cooperation with the administration. Villalobos further stated that from late 1971 until October 1972, he received numerous requests from Marumoto and Armendariz to perform services in relation to the re-election effort. According to Villalobos, considerable pressure was applied concerning the continuation of NEDA's federal grants and contracts. In fact, Villalobos said, he resigned his NEDA post in October 1972 so that NEDA would not have difficulty renewing its Commerce Department grant. C. Neutralization of political opponents. There is evidence that the Spanish-speaking re-election team acted to convince potential opponents of the president's re-election effort that they were in line for substantial government funding, when in fact there was no intention to make such an award. The subject of one such effort was the Southwest Council of La Raza, a Spanish-speaking group based in Tucson, Arizona. A June 9, 1972 Administrative Confidential White House Memorandum from Marumoto to Colson and Malek states, Rodriguez working to obtain $30,000 for the Southwest Council of La Raza for a conference next month. This is the group we want to neutralize. Apparently, this $30,000 grant was made as a showing of good faith by the administration. On June 23, 1972, a White House memorandum notes that the $30,000 grant had been obtained from the Department of Labor and that Rodriguez was still working with the Southwest Council of La Raza. On June 29, 1972, David L. Weimer, Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Administration and Management, wrote Richard Wise, an assistant to the Undersecretary of Labor. In seeking to create in key states an appropriate atmosphere for the re-election of the President, OASA has taken initial steps as follows. 1. Obtainment of a $30,000 grant from Manpower Administration to support National Conference of Southwest Council of La Raza. This is a beginning effort to depoliticize this grassroots group, representing a minimum of 7 states. Conference to be held in Washington, D.C. last part of July. On the face of things, more substantial government grants were in store for the Southwest Council of La Raza. On August 18, 1972, Marumoto noted in a report to Colson and Malek that he and Rob Davidson were working to obtain funding of a $6 million HUD proposal submitted by the Southwest Council. In addition, the Southwest Council was being considered for an OMBE grant. The Council did, in fact, appear well qualified. On August 8, 1972, Nathan Bayer wrote to Marumoto and Armendariz, I spoke with John Jenkins this afternoon concerning the current status of your priority OMBE proposals. In the case of the Southwest Council of La Raza, John met with them this morning and spoke with them for about 2 hours. John is very impressed with the group and says that he would have no difficulty in funding them. He awaits your signal on this matter. The signal never came. In fact, the evidence suggests that there was no intention to grant the Southwest Council of La Raza $6 million or anywhere near that sum. Rather, it appears that the Spanish-speaking team intended to neutralize this potentially hostile group by holding out the promise of substantial federal funding. The following is from Marumoto's public testimony. Now, were you aware of an organization called the Southwest Council of La Raza? Marumoto: Yes, sir. Did you engage in any discussions with them concerning any grants? Marumoto: Yes. Could you tell us what discussions you had with them? Marumoto: The Southwest Council of La Raza is an active democratic group that I believe was founded in Arizona and now is expanded into the Southwest states. Were they supportive of the administration? Marumoto: Well, in some discussion that some of our people had from the campaign staff as well as our staff, there was some discussion about them supporting the president. They, in turn, said they would, provided they could get some federal contracts. Did you discuss any particular federal contracts with them? Marumoto: I believe there were some discussions. I had only one meeting with them, if you recall, and the others picked up on it. I think what finally happened was that the Committee to Re-elect, the Spanish-speaking division, recommended a strategy for working with them, that they be funded for $30,000 for a national conference that they wanted to hold. What were they actually looking for? What kind of grant? Marumoto: I believe they were looking for either 2 or 3 grants at maybe 2 or 3 different departments or agencies. That amounted to approximately how much? Marumoto: I am sure of 6 figures. I do not know. Sums about $400,000? Marumoto: It could be more. I do not know the exact figure. what was being offered to them at that time or suggested was $30,000 for a conference? Marumoto: Right, with consideration for assistance in a few months. Dash: Mr. Marumoto, do you recall discussions we had yesterday concerning this particular organization, and your statement to us that at no time did you believe they were going to get any grant, but that you were in a sense engaging with them in what has been known as a stroking session? Marumoto: We were neutralizing them. Dash: You were neutralizing them? Marumoto: Yes, sir. Dash: And by holding them at bay, not giving them a grant, but discussing the possibility of a $30,000 conference grant, this sort of at least held them away from being an opponent if they were not going to be supportive. Marumoto: That is right. D. Malek's comments on grant-making activity as to Spanish-speaking constituents. Malek, when questioned concerning the grant and contract activities just described, testified that, "I do not believe I knew that they," Marumoto and Armendariz, "were participating in the review of minority business enterprise grants." When confronted with copies of numerous documents sent to him describing such activity, Malek stated that he is not certain he read the memorandums. He added that he was occupied on many matters and that reading an activity report, which did not require action on his part, had a low priority. He said that if he had read the passages in question, he would have interpreted them as evidencing cooperation with Spanish-speaking groups to help them develop the skills with which to apply for grants on a substantive basis. Malek also stated that in his opinion it was improper for campaign officials to have sign-off powers respecting government grants and contracts. He said it was inappropriate to deny funding to a responsible organization simply because they were not supportive of the administration. End of section 23. Recording by Maria Casper.